If you've been watching my videos for a while, one of the things that may not be immediately apparent is that before every video, I actually worry about how my hair is going to look on camera because I have kind of lifelong hair issues. But I am not worried about that for this Writing Wednesday because I'm going to wash my hair right in front of you because I'm going to talk about the editing process. A viewer asked me a while ago to talk about what you do when you've written your first draft, and although I have talked about that a little bit already in the video I made after NaNoWriMo, I thought now that I'm right in the thick of the editing process, it's a good time to talk about it again. And it kind of occurred to me that those infamous shampoo bottle instructions are kind of a good metaphor for the editing and writing process. You know, lather, rinse, repeat as needed. Now, one big difference with the writing process is that what I think of as the rinse cycle actually comes first, except with writing, instead of rinse, it's rest. It's where you write something, you've poured out your first draft, and I'm a big believer, it doesn't work the same way for everyone, but for me, I kind of have to go from beginning to end and write out a first draft before I do any tinkering, and then I like to set it aside and let it rest. How long you can let the rest cycle last depends on a lot of things, but it's really good to do it. When you've written first draft, lay it aside for a while, let it rest before you try to do any editing. Editing, to me, is the lather part. It's the part where you really get into the nitty-gritty. You read over what you wrote in that feverish excitement days or weeks or months ago, and you look at it with a little more perspective. I always think ideally I'm going to be looking for something different on each editing pass that I make through a manuscript. There's one time through that I'm going to be looking at just historical details, trying to make them more accurate, and then there's another time where I'm going to be looking at characterization, and then another pass through that's going to be just for language, and then there's the spelling and grammar errors. But the fact is, I sort of end up doing it all at once, because as I read through, I see all kinds of things that are wrong. For me, a big one is cutting, because as I've said before, I almost always tend to overwrite. My first drafts are way longer than they need to be, and for me, a big part of editing is just the process of saying, what can I cut? What can I lose? In this incredibly long, wordy scene, what's the key part? What's the part that's really important? And so you get into the nitty-gritty and you really start rubbing out some of the stuff you don't need and cleaning up the stuff that's there. Then, of course, you're back to the rinse, or rather rest cycle all over again. You've done the editing, you have a new draft, then if time permits, put it aside again. Now, I keep saying if time permits because I actually got called on this myself the other day by a friend. I was editing something fairly shortly after having written it, and she said, don't you set it aside and let it rest for a while, being a writer herself? And I said, yeah, in an ideal world I do, but I really don't have time right now. I'm on a bit of a deadline with this, not a literal deadline because I don't have a contract for it, but I do have a kind of relationship with the publisher that published my last two historical novels. They're at least interested in seeing it, and I've said that I'll send it to them in September. And of course the other thing that puts me on a bit of a deadline is, as you know, I am a teacher, so the summer when I'm off work is the time that I have to devote to writing. So I don't really have the luxury to finish writing something and set it aside for, 6 or 8 weeks. But I set it aside for a little while, and even in this case, the part I was editing was not the same part I had just finished writing. I really think that rest cycle is so important because you can't judge your own work when you're too close to it. After the next rest cycle, of course, you come back for another edit, another pass through at the lather stage. And again, with some of the debris from the previous draft cleared out of the way, this draft should be cleaner and clearer, and you can see your mistakes more clearly and maybe see what you need to do to fix them. And it's not just mistakes, sometimes it's things you need to add. This character needs to be a little more well-rounded, a little more fleshed out, as I was talking about a couple of weeks ago. Or this scene doesn't really pack the emotional punch that it's supposed to. How do I rewrite it so that it does? The other thing is this process is kind of paper intensive because even though I write on the computer and I can do some editing on the computer, really for every editing stage I need to print out a new draft and read through it. Just the process of reading through it from beginning to end does a lot to show me where the weak points are. So I guess that's kind of the cost of doing business. Sorry, trees. Now, back when I was just a little girl and my mother was teaching me to wash my hair, she always taught me to shampoo twice. Lather, rinse, repeat. Many years later, when I was a teenager, I read in a women's magazine and some beauty feature that unless you work in a coal mine, you probably don't need to shampoo twice. But most people shampoo their hair either once or twice. However, with the lather, rinse, repeat cycle, or rather the edit, rest, repeat cycle of working on a novel, there really is no cutoff. Twice is definitely not enough, I can tell you that much. When you've written a first draft, let it sit, edit it, let it sit some more, and give it another edit. You may feel, especially if you're a first timer, like it's ready, but it's really, really not. Obviously, there comes a point if you want to share your work with the public or just not go crazy, when you have to draw a line under it and say, this is as good as I can make this book at this point in my life. But that usually requires several times around in the lather, rinse, repeat cycle, and you don't get anywhere from trying to rush or cut short the process. It occurs to me, by the way, that that video I linked to a while back about the last time I talked about what to do with your first draft and how to, prepare for the editing process was my post-NaNoWriMo video where I danced joyously in a belly dance costume that showed my belly button. And this video where I'm talking about the editing process shows me clad in a towel, exposing my bare shoulders. Put those two together, and that is by far the most nudity you're ever going to see in this video series. But it strikes me that maybe that's kind of an appropriate metaphor, because they say writing is about being willing to share yourself and bare yourself, and to me, in a way, that's particularly true during the editing process. It's certainly the point at which your naked frailties are most obvious to yourself and to any friendly readers or critics or editors that may be working with your work, because your mistakes are all out there. They're on display. You may have moments of saying, oh, this is terrible, I can't do anything with it. But if you keep trusting the process and keep lather, rinse, and repeat, eventually, well, you may never look as perfect as the girl in the shampoo ad, and you may never have a bestseller, but you'll have a piece of work that you can be proud of.